Shabbat Shalom, everybody. This is Rabbi Stephen here with you, Rav Shmuel Rashbi, as I like to call myself. Um, so here we are with another 10-minute Torah for you. And I'd like to do a couple of thank yous, a few shout outs. First of all, to all the folks that covered services last week while I was with my grandson and my new granddaughter in law. They got married, and it was a wonderful time. And thank you for covering so my wife and I, the Rebbitzin, can go off and do that. And I always like it. I always love it when people get up and they kind of push themselves a little bit. And I know it's not easy to get up in the sanctuary and the shul and lead services. For me, I know I make it look easy sometimes, but if I may pat myself on the back a little bit. But remember, I've been doing this for years. I've been doing this for a long time. I was doing this way before I even became a rabbi. I used to lead services when the rabbi wasn't there, and of course, when Tanner Joe was our clergy, then I would get up and do services with him, and I paid attention, and I got used to it. Plus, I've done a lot on my own, so I feel pretty at ease when I'm up on the bema now. And it's not always the case. I get up there sometimes, I get nervous, and, it is what it is. But when people who don't do this regularly get up, and it's fairly uncomfortable, fairly uncommon, and they do that, that's a big deal. That's a big deal. They've pushed themselves. And it's great when you get more and more involved with your religion, because as a rabbi, I see myself as a facilitator. I officiate. And to see people empowered by getting up and doing something like that is just absolutely a wonderful thing. The second thing is, as most of you know, when I do these little videos, these little vlogs, I guess as they're called, video logs, I post them on YouTube. And there are people on YouTube that follow me. And some of you have put some comments in there. And I just want to say that I'm fairly humbled by the fact that you give me likes, that you respond, that you interact. It's really cool. It means that I'm doing something right, but it also means that you're gaining, and that's really the whole point. That people from around the world, I have a website, modernrabbistephen.com, and I get notified when people are on there. Today there was somebody there from New South Wales. People come up from England, from Canada, across the United States. I've had people from New Zealand come on. I've had people from New Zealand send me texts, or not texts, but messages on Facebook on YouTube. So, and thank you for that. Thank you for all your involvement. So, let's talk about this week's Torah portion, which is Vayikra. Vayikra, otherwise known in English as Leviticus, it is the third book of the Torah. And Leviticus, the book of the Levites, right? The book of basically the processes and a lot of the rituals that we're doing. And it basically starts off with the offerings. So at the end of Exodus, we've seen the Mishkan get built. We've seen all the dimensions. I like to compare it to like IKEA. You get the instructions like, okay, we got to put up we got to cut the planks. We got to do the walls. We got to make the furniture. Okay. So, and, because Bezalel and Aholiab from the tribes of Judah and Dan, respectively, were the ones that, led in the construction of it. They also made the clothes for the priests. So now we've got the basis. We've got our tabernacle. We've got our shul, if you will, right? Where everything is, where we're going to quote unquote meet, Shekhinah, meet with God, Shochin. And now we get all the things that we're going to be doing as Jews as we start this whole wonderful process of Judaism. And the first things we're going to do is we're going to show people what to do if you have a lot of gratitude and you just want to show your appreciation of God for all the great things. We want to give thanks for maybe a good year, recovering from illness. So there are procedures there, which animals to use in the offerings, and I'm going to use the word sacrifice. And we're going to talk about this as the bulk of today's or this week's 10-minute Torah. And then we have two ways to deal with sin. So one is, you sinned and you thought about it. You said, I really shouldn't have done that. I kind of gave in to whatever emotions or passions I had, so I'd like to make up for it. And there's a way, there's again offerings or slash sacrifices, to do in a whole process and a procedure. And then there's I always get these confused. You got the chatat and the chatat, which is making up for a sin, and the shogeg, which means I didn't know. I found out later I was eating, the wrong kind of fat, or somebody happened to put pork down, and I didn't know it until later. They said, "Oh, how'd you think those? Would you like those pork rolls?" I'm like, "Pork rolls? I thought it was fish or whatever." Okay, that's an inadvertent thing. Now you're going to bring an offering, and you're going to make up for it. So there are ways. We're not perfect. God did not create us perfect. So there are ways, to compensate for anything we do that's wrong. So, and there's a process, which animals to use. If you're rich, for example, you bring an ox. If you kind of well means, you bring something from the flock, a goat or a sheep. If not, then you bring a bird. And if you're dirt poor, you bring flour. Okay, so they make the point in the Chumash that the word they use is korban, which is the word for offering. They do not use the Hebrew word zevachim, which means sacrifice. Okay, difference. So a lot of people in this day and age, and remember, this was 3,000, 3,500 years ago, when we first received instructions that, we're going to start this thing called Judaism, and that we now call Judaism. And we're going to have all sorts of rituals and procedures, to help us live righteous lives. That is, doing what is right and correct in the eyes of Hashem and in the eyes of our fellow humans. Okay, so back then, the big procedure was sacrifices, and we know from history that many of the ancient nations would actually engage in human sacrifices, and that's absolutely wrong. So God is like, okay, we're just going to use animals to kind of wean us off. Now, we have the third temple. Are we going to still be using animals? It's going to be a big butcher shop, where people are going to bring animal offerings, and they're going to cut it up, and we're going to invite our friends, and we're going to have a big feast, for whatever the occasion. Or, since we've been only doing prayers for the last 2,000 plus years because we haven't had a temple, is the next temple going to be a big synagogue? Or are we going to go back to the offerings? But as somebody suggested, I guess Rav Kook, a great rabbi, a great sage of the last few hundred years, thought that the next temple is going to be a vegetarian offering. Maybe we're going to offer flour, which, by the way, we can do. There's a precedent set in the Torah. There are some Jews that are very fundamental. The Torah says this, and that's what we're going to do. We're not going to do prayers because the Torah specifically lays out instructions of sacrifices, of offering animals, when, how, and we rebuild the temple. That's what we're going to do. Other people are more progressive. Well, you say that if you do something long enough, the tradition becomes kind of a law. For example, in this day and age of the 24/7 news cycle, do we really need to have 2 days of Passover, Shavuot, and Sukkah? We know when the Molad or when the full moon is. We don't need the 2 days. Now, some people, like my son, will come back and say, well, there were still Jews living in the outback or wherever, in the backwoods that don't have computers. They don't know when they need, to see that moon, and they need to figure it out. Okay, fair enough. However, some people say since we've been doing it long enough, we stick with the 2 days, period, end of story. Well, then can't you take that logic and say, since we have not been doing sacrifices or offerings for the last 2,000 years, and today people have their pets, and they love their pets, and they're into animals, and the new year for animals, the beginning of Elul, has become kind of a homage to animals, and we bring our animals, and some shuls allow you to bring your animals to services, and they say a prayer, and it's a big humane type of thing these days. We don't want to see animals get killed and cut up and eaten. We don't want to do that. And what if you're a vegan? What if you're a vegetarian? Which, by the way, Judaism does not preclude. You can do that and be a good Jew, right? So what is it going to be if we are going to do offerings, and if the Torah lays out the idea that you can do a flour or a grain offering, if, of course, you're destitute, you don't have the means to offer a full-on animal, then why can't that be the standard? I don't know. Well, it does say that, people of means whose hearts move them. But, I mean, just bring a lot of flour if you're rich, make a lot of bread or something. Why not, right? So this is an interesting question. And, my whole shtick, if you will, as a rabbi, is the Torah is not just history. It's not history. It's relevant. Even though we don't have a temple, we don't do offerings the way they did back then. We still do offerings. We're offering our heart in prayer. Okay? You want to offer grain or something, you want to give to charity. That's an offering. Okay? Why not adapt it to modern means? We're still serving God, right? So we look at the Torah and we say, okay, in today's world, how do we serve Hashem? How do we serve each other? How do we be good people? How do we develop that? Think about that. See you next week. Again, Shabbat Shalom, and thank you again for listening.